Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI Cinderveston, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind adjust the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI Cinderveston.
Back in 1989, I was asked, who is Philip Emeagwali? I'm not exactly sure, I answered. Then someone wrote that, quote, Philip Emeagwali is a polymath that was trained for 16 years, and therefore he can solve interdisciplinary scientific problems that a mathematician that was trained for only 8 years in mathematics alone could not solve, unquote. It's not arrogance for me to say that my scientific lectures posted online at emeagwali.com demonstrated my command of materials. You don't see a surgeon going into the surgery room with a book titled How to Do Surgery. Yet every speaker in every scientific conference cling on to his PowerPoints as if it was a matter of life and death. The reason they must use PowerPoints is that they lack the command of their materials. In contrast, I have never used PowerPoints in my scientific lectures. And at the end of each lecture, the audience stand as one to give me a standing ovation, and did so because I have the command of my materials that in turn could only come from a deep bench of ideas and knowledge. To be the lone wolf in the 1980s and at the farthest frontier of supercomputing demanded a command of materials, and in particular a command of 65,536 processors that were needed to discover the fastest supercomputer. I commanded materials across the branch of physics called fluid dynamics. I commanded materials across the branch of calculus called partial differential equations. I commanded materials across the branch of algebra called numerical linear algebra. I commanded materials across the branch of computing called massively parallel processing. You can verify my command of materials by doing a one-by-one, side-by-side, and videotape-by-videotape comparisons of Philip Emeagwali with the videotapes of the likes of Albert Einstein, including Albert Einstein himself. My supreme confidence that seems like arrogance arose because the likes of Albert Einstein don't have the aura of invisibility that they had when I was trained for only 8 years, like they were. I am confident because I'm 8 years ahead of the likes of theoretical physicists such as Albert Einstein. I am confident because I'm 8 years ahead of computational physicists. I was confident because I was the only person in the decade of the 1980s that was at the farthest frontier of supercomputing. Only one lone wolf could be at that farthest frontier, and I was that programmer, period. My confidence against the likes of Albert Einstein was the confidence a 16-year-old boy has when challenged to wrestle against an 8-year-old girl. Who is Philip Emeagwali? I am 4 in 10 parts a mathematician. I am 3 in 10 parts a physicist. I am 3 in 10 parts a supercomputer scientist. Who is Philip Emeagwali? I'm a scientist that is the subject of school reports. I was an astronomer who declined an astronomer position in Washington, D.C. I was an astronaut candidate hopeful who was declined by NASA. I was an engineer that worked on 9 US government dams and their reservoirs and power plants that were along the North Platte River in the state of Wyoming, United States. I was a geologist that pushed the frontiers of extreme scale computations in subsurface flow modeling. Yet, I don't have a deep yearning for engineering or geology or astronomy. I have given up on my 1970s and 80s ambition to fly into outer space. The reason I discovered how to solve that grand challenge problem of supercomputing and solved it alone was that I was trained in the United States for the 16 years onward of March 24, 1974. I experimentally programmed supercomputers and did so continuously and onward of June 20, 1974. With that training, I could solve grand challenge problems in supercomputing that were impossible for a scientist trained for only 8 years who could never touch the most massively parallel supercomputer ever built. I, Philip Emeagwali, was the lone wolf and the only full-time programmer of the most massively parallel supercomputer that was ever built as of 1989. Where was Philip Emeagwali? After 16 years of training, I became a research physicist at the frontier of knowledge of fluid dynamics, and I became a research mathematician at the frontier of knowledge of the partial differential equation of a new calculus, and I became a research algebraist at the frontier of knowledge of the extreme scale system of equations of a new algebra, and I became a research computer scientist at the frontier of knowledge of massively parallel processing, and I became the lone wolf researcher at the terra incognita of the fastest computations. What did Philip Emeagwali discover? After 16 years of training and as many years of supercomputing, I discovered how to massively parallel process and how to compute across a new internet that's de facto a new supercomputer that's a global network of 64 binary thousand commodity processors. For 16 years, and in the United States, I conducted research as a lone wolf black supercomputer scientist. Research in supercomputing is conducted at the frontiers of physics and mathematics and computing, and for that reason, it is intensively collaborative. Back in the 1970s and 80s, no white supercomputer scientist had collaborated with a black supercomputer scientist. And white supercomputer scientists that agreed to collaborate with me withdrew their offer after they discovered that I was black. For that reason, I conducted research alone, and at the farthest frontier of supercomputing. From those rejections, I learned that when one door closes, another opens. Because I was a lone wolf supercomputer scientist during the 16 years onward of June 20, 1974, I was described as the father of the parallel processing supercomputer that is a global network of commodity processors, and that is a new internet. There is a point of pride in saying I never collaborated with any scientist or scientific team. For that reason, I don't have a co-discoverer or a co-inventor. That co-discoverer would have diluted my contribution, that is the subject of school reports on the development of the massively parallel supercomputer that was a new internet and that was a global network of 64 binary thousand commodity processors.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.